He didn't speak much, never smiled, just sat by the window every morning with black coffee in a cracked mug, watching, as if the world outside was still a battlefield and he was the last soldier left alive. No one knew his name. No one dared to ask. Till one day, ... a single gunshot broke the silence. And from across the hall, she knocked on his door. She wasn't afraid. She wanted to learn how to shoot. What started with a lesson turned into something that neither of them could control, but the ghosts of war never sleep. Frank Delaney had lived in apartment 3C for nearly 20 years. The building stood like a weary monument on the edge of Brooklyn, where new coffee shops sprouted between crumbling brick walls, and time moved just a little faster than it should. The medals in the shoebox under his bed had long lost their shine, and the folded flag on his shelf had turned yellow around the edges. Frank didn't need friends. Frank watched her from his peephole, not out of curiosity, but habit. He noticed the way she moved carefully, like someone who had learned not to trust her own shadow. He didn't need noise. What he needed was silence. His neighbors changed, constantly young couples, lost artists, students, but Frank stayed the same. He didn't apologize. He never did. But she wasn't angry. His morning routine never faltered. Black coffee at 5:30, pull-ups on the bar bolted to his bathroom doorframe, and a short walk to the rooftop where he stood in silence, staring at a city that no longer recognized him, when everyone else. She looked like someone who had once dreamed loudly, but now whispered even to herself. He was a man carved by war. Vietnam had taken pieces of him, some visible, others buried too deep to name. It is until Emily Carter moved into apartment 3B. She arrived with nothing more than 3 boxes. A cat in a plastic carrier, and eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone twice her age. She was beautiful in an unintentional way. Short chestnut hair that curled at the ends. No makeup. Oversized sweater. Paint-stained jeans. They didn't speak for 2 weeks. Until the morning she knocked on his door. Frank answered slowly, half expecting a complaint about the gunshot he'd fired in the basement shooting range last night. "I heard the shot," she said. Frank blinked. She hesitated. "Can you teach me?" He stared at her. "Teach you what? Or shoot?" The pause between them stretched longer than necessary. Frank's voice was low. "Why?" Emily swallowed. "Because I want to feel like I can protect myself. Just once." Frank didn't ask more. He never did. Instead, he nodded. "Tomorrow. 7 a.m. Basement, the walls were thick. No one complained. Or if they did, they never said it twice." The basement range was nothing more than a forgotten storage room Frank had converted years ago. Emily showed up on time, hoodie pulled tight, nervous hands tucked into her sleeves. Frank handed her a Glock 19. "Ever held one?" She shook her head. "This isn't a toy. It doesn't care how sad you are, how angry you are, or who hurt you. It only knows where you're aiming." He placed it in her palm gently, adjusting her grip with 2 fingers. She nodded, her lips pressed together. Feet shoulder width, arms straight, elbows not locked. He stood behind her, silent, only adjusting when necessary. She fired. Missed. Again, Frank said. Her aim improved, her posture changed. She walked straighter, talked a little more. Frank still said little, but he watched. He always watched. She fired. Missed again, but she didn't quit. That's what made him notice her. Over the next few weeks, she came every morning. They rarely spoke outside the range. A nod in the hallway, silent acknowledgement at the mailbox. Until one morning, she brought coffee. 2 cups, one for her, one for him. "I figured you'd like it black," she said. He took it without a word. That night, she knocked on his door. Not for a lesson, just to talk. "Was married once," she said, sitting on his couch. "He said I was too emotional, too dramatic. That I cried too, easily asked too many questions, loved too hard." Frank didn't respond. I like the way you don't talk. I'm not trying to impress you," she added. Frank looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone in his silence. The next morning, their training changed. He taught her breathing patterns, movement drills, target transitions. She picked it up fast. Too fast. "You sure you never held a gun before?" he asked. She smiled. "Not legally." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Why did you say yes to teaching me? Later, in the stairwell, she stopped him. Frank thought for a long moment. Because you knocked. Their connection deepened in fragments. Shared silence on the rooftop. A game of chess in his living room. A moment too long when their hands touched over a coffee mug. War had taught him to survive, but not to feel. And Emily. She was dangerous in a different way, not because she held a weapon, but because she held truth. But with every step forward, Frank felt something stirring beneath the surface, something old and buried. And truth, Frank knew, had a way of shattering the strongest walls. One evening, she didn't show up. No text, no knock. Frank waited, didn't want to admit that he was waiting. The next morning, she knocked again. Eyes red, jacket torn, lip bruised. Frank opened the door slowly. I need to use the gun, she said. He didn't ask why, but this time, he didn't say yes either.
Ow.
Instead, he stepped aside, let her in. And the silence between them said everything. The gun sat between them on the kitchen table, silent and cold, like a question neither of them wanted to ask. She sat across from Frank, her lips still bruised, fingers nervously circling the rim of the coffee mug he'd handed her. She hadn't said much since she walked in, just that she needed the gun. Nothing more. And Frank, for all the words he'd never spoken, knew when not to push. But this time, this wasn't training. This was something else. Something real. You going to tell me what happened? He finally asked. Her eyes were locked on the Glock. Do I need to? No, Frank said, but it helps. Emily sighed. Long, heavy, like it had been held in for years, came back. Frank didn't need a name, but he found me. Said he missed me. Said he forgave me. Forgave you, her ex-husband, the one who made her small. The one she had whispered about once, and never mentioned again. I thought he was gone for good, she said. Frank's jaw tensed. For leaving. Frank looked at her then, his voice low. You didn't leave. You escaped. Emily gave a bitter smile. He doesn't see it that way. There was a long silence, not the comfortable kind they used to share. This one was sharp, pressing. Finally, Frank leaned back, eyes steady on hers. I won't let him hurt you. Her voice cracked. I don't want you to protect me. I want you to help me protect myself. He nodded, then stood up. And for the first time since Vietnam, Frank opened the locked drawer under his bed. They trained harder after that, every morning without fail. Frank taught her close quarters drills, how to defend in tight spaces, how to disable with precision instead of rage. He showed her how to fight, but more importantly, how to think under pressure. Emily was no longer just aiming at paper targets. She was learning to survive, and she was good. Too good. You're not the only one with a past. One morning, after a flawless set of draws and reloads, Frank watched her from across the room and said, Where did you learn to move like that? Emily looked up, her expression unreadable. A group shot of his old unit, one face circled in red. People never come back the same, he muttered to himself. Frank didn't ask more. Quieter, but in a focused way. Like something inside her had clicked. But that night, he pulled out a photo from his drawer. A week passed. Then two, Emily became different. Frank noticed everything, the way her hands stopped shaking when she held a weapon, how her voice grew steadier, and her smile. Well, it appeared less, but when it did, it stayed longer. But Frank had also changed. The walls he'd spent decades building were now cracked. She saw him, and he knew it. One night, while they sat on the rooftop watching the city bleed into dusk, she turned to him. Do you ever miss it? She asked. What? The war. Frank didn't blink. No, why not? He looked away. Because I was good at it. Emily nodded. So was I. It was the first time she admitted it. The first time Frank understood she had seen combat too. Maybe not in a jungle, maybe not in uniform. But war leaves fingerprints. He saw them all over her. It happened on a rainy Thursday. Emily didn't show up for training. Frank waited until noon, then again at sunset. No knock. No message. By midnight, he was pacing. And by 2 a.m., he was outside apartment 3B, gun holstered under his jacket, picking the lock she thought only she had. The apartment was dark, silent, but not empty. A shape moved in the kitchen. Frank pulled the Glock. Emily. It wasn't Emily. It was him, the ex-husband. Blood on his shirt, a twisted smile on his face. She left the door open, he said, like she wanted me to find her. Frank didn't speak. Stepped closer, gun raised, steady hands. She's not here, the man continued. Left in a rush. But she told me about you. Old soldier, teaches girls how to shoot, real hero. Frank's voice was ice. Where is she? The man laughed. Why? You gonna save her? Frank stepped forward. The man reached. Frank fired. Once Emily was found 3 hours later, curled up in a train station bathroom. Alive, shaking, but alive. She came back in an ambulance handcuffed, because the police thought she'd planned it, that Frank was her weapon. She said nothing. Frank said everything. And when the dust settled, there were no charges. Only a quiet understanding between a man and a woman who had both seen too much, lost too much, and yet found something in each other that neither expected: redemption. Months passed, just 2 floors up. Emily moved out of apartment 3B, not far. They still trained. They still drank coffee in silence. But now sometimes Frank smiled, and sometimes she'd let herself laugh. They never kissed, never touched more than necessary. But when Emily looked at him now, it wasn't with fear or gratitude. It was with something deeper, something earned. One night she knocked on his door. No gun, no bruises. Just her. Tell me something about Vietnam, she said. Frank nodded. Okay. They sat. They talked. He told her about the jungle, the smells, the things that never made it into movies. She listened, head on his shoulder. And when the sun came up, she said, "You saved me." Frank didn't answer, but he reached for her hand, held it tight. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a soldier. He felt human.